All right, hey guys, welcome back to another video. It has been quite a little bit since I last posted, I think a couple of months, but in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a quick side project that I worked on this weekend using AWS Bedrock. So the goal of this project was essentially to take some raw unstructured text data, generate a taxonomy for a bunch of key issues. So identify the key issue. In this case, the reason I'm saying key issue is because we're using raw conversational transcripts. And then auto label that data with the taxonomy using AWS Bedrock. And so super quickly to outline like what's happening. Essentially, we have raw conversation transcripts, something like this. So these are from a customer service setting. It's just a random data set where we have, an agent and a user going back and forth regarding different customer service issues for a fashion retailer. So we have this raw unstructured data, which is a conversation transcript. We have two different processes that we're going to check out, or that I was exploring while learning AWS Bedrock. And one is to actually just summarize that conversation. So a summarization flow, and then a classification task, which is to auto label that using prompts and LLMs. So that's one side. And then we also want to look at sort of generating that taxonomy. Taxonomy, if you don't know, is like a list of labels to sort of topic model something. And we're going to be using the summaries of these transcripts that we get from our summarized conversation prompt to also look at generating a better taxonomy. So super quick weekend project to look at AWS Bedrock. So just as a quick example of what this might look like, we have a longer than this conversation transcript with an agent user. As I mentioned, we are going to use a prompt to generate a single line summary. So the user contacted the fashion retailer's customer service to inquire about being charged twice for a single shirt purchase, and so on and so forth. And then at the very end, we want to label that summary with a topic so we can actually visualize what's in our data. So it's a multi-step prompt flow, and really the goal of this was to just check out this AWS prompt flow feature and see how it essentially works. So jumping into here, what I have is a Streamlit application that sort of just steps through some code in a notebook. I just converted it into a Streamlit application, and it's just called Automated Topic Modeling using AWS Bedrock Prompt Flows. So here I have a bunch of data loaded in as JSON files. So these are ABCD. The reason why it's called ABCD is because the ABCD is the data set that I'm using. And here we have a bunch of files, each with around 10 conversations. So this is the total conversation counts. So that means like each of these files has a transcript like this, and it has 10 of them. And then I'll get into what the true and false means, but essentially we have a list of files. Then I have a taxonomy that's just loading from a .txt file. This is just a very basic one, and we'll look at how we improve this as well. And then I have a few buttons to just process some results and then generate some visualizations. So so this is just a very simple front end to actually work through the backend logic. All right, so jumping into some code here. So this is what the raw data set looks like. It's essentially a conversation here that we've just identified. So this is a single conversation ID. Each ID has a conversation key that essentially has that text string with sort of the conversation transcript itself. So we have 10 per file loaded in. There's some metadata in there, but we're not really going to use that. And essentially I have 10 of these in my data set, right? So what we're going to be doing is generating a single line summary using AWS Bedrock, and then also auto labeling that with our taxonomy. And then we'll also look at how we can generate a better taxonomy. So first off here, we have our very simple taxonomy. Now I mentioned these were conversations around a fashion retailer. So we have things about like order inquiry, shipping, returns, etc. So that's our taxonomy that we're going to label things with. And if I just go ahead and select one of these files that isn't processed, indicated by the false here, and just click view selected files, you can see what our conversation actually looks like. So this is a full conversation transcript right here, and we have 10 of these per file, right? And we have some metadata as well, but we're not really going to actually use that. And what we can do here is I can go ahead and check this run auto label flow button. So as soon as I do that, what this is going to do is it's going to trigger a prompt flow in AWS, and it should go ahead and start sending each of those conversations over to AWS to go ahead and run through our flow. Now I'll show you the prompt flow in a second, but I just want to show the output. And once it's done that, it's just going to update the enriched file and then update our database CSV. So if we switch back to Chrome over here, so we can see our status has completed, and you can see that this file is set to true. And if we now view this selected file, what we will see is we now have a few new columns. So what we've done is we've run a prompt and we've generated a single line summary for each and every single one of those conversations. And then we've also labeled it with this taxonomy right over here. So you can see some of them are services, some of them are technical, some of them are returns. And then we also have the reasoning from the LLM on why it chose that specific label. So you can see that that's the whole flow. And that's essentially our end result, is we can take an unstructured file and we can get an auto label put on it. So let's take a look at how this is actually working. So I'm going to switch over to Bedrock here, and I am going to go into the prompt flows. So here you can see I have two different prompt flows. We'll take a look at the generate taxonomy in a second, but we're just going to jump into the auto label flow. Okay, so now that we're inside the flow, essentially, if you've never seen this before, what Bedrock has is this new feature called prompt flows that lets you essentially build a step-by-step prompt flow using these essentially drag and drop nodes. So you can drag and drop an agent node, and you have different inputs that go in and then sort of an output. And then you have, in this case, what I'm using is this prompt node where you can define some sort of input. You can select a prompt that you have defined, and then you can send that essentially to a model to get a model completion, and then you could link that to a different completion step or a different node essentially. And in this case, it's a little bit like make.com if you ever use that. And it allows you to just link different components in this sort of no-code GUI, sort of doing what LangChain does with a chain. So all the way on the left here, let me just start by explaining what is going on in this flow. So let me just zoom in a little bit. So all the way on the left here, we have an input node, and this is essentially when we call the Bedrock API where we pass data into. So in this scenario, what I'm passing into the input flow for this specific flow into the input node is essentially the conversation that you saw before, so that string of conversation transcript, and then our taxonomy. So if you remember, our taxonomy is this right here. And then in this flow, what we're going to be doing is first taking the conversation, and then we're going to be using a prompt called key issue summary. And this is my prompt right here. I've defined it. I've created it in the prompts section in Bedrock, prompt management section. And then here, what I've done is essentially just written out a fairly simple prompt to basically create a single line summary. So you are an expert conversation analyzer summarizing key issues from a fashion retailer. Please identify the key issue causing the customer to contact the fashion retailer. We are loading in our input using a parameter, in this case conversation, and we're asking it to output in a single line. So here is our input node. We are just grabbing the first element in the data array in the list that I'm passing in. And again, that first element is our conversation string. And that's what's going into this. And we're using Mixtral 7b. And what this node is going to do is essentially just trigger a model completion call with this prompt, and it's going to fill dynamically our conversation in there. Okay. So that was a lot of words, but essentially the output from that goes into this node right over here, and it's going to go into this key issue node. So for whatever reason, these lines are actually connected wrong, or like are in the wrong places. So the key issue comes from obviously this key issue summary prompt, and that's what's getting loaded here. And the taxonomy comes from our input. So that's just loading in the taxonomy that we had defined right over here. And this is now loading into a separate prompt. And you can see this prompt is about basically auto labeling or topic modeling that taxonomy. So here's a taxonomy, here's a key issue. We're going to load in those two variables. We have two different types of inputs. You can see we've defined right here. By the way, these inputs get defined when you define the prompt itself. So just keep that in mind. So, and then we're basically asking it to group to the best fitting class and return the following output as key value pairs. You could use JSON. Key values is also a very simple way to get nice output. So we have our label that the model has decided fits that conversation, and also the reasoning on sort of why it decided that is the label to attach. So that's this flow right here. And you can see we have two different output nodes. And in the first output node, we are going to be sending back our labeling prompt. So our individual label itself. And then we are also going to be sending back our single line summary. And so both of those get sent through the output, and that's essentially our prompt flow. So hopefully that made sense, and that's essentially how we're getting back these single line summaries for each conversation, annotated. And then we're also getting back a label and our reasoning. So those are all from that single individual prompt flow. And that just basically lets us annotate a conversation and then see, what's going on. What are the key issues very quickly, right? So it's a simple way to sort of use, in this case, this prompt flow to do that. Cool. So now before I jump into the sort of the code, I just want to show you the generate taxonomy flow, which is a separate flow that I've defined over here in Bedrock. So it's using this prompt right here, generate taxonomy. It's also using Mixtro 7b. And essentially, if we switch over to the prompt flow itself, you can see this one's much more simple. We have an input node, we have a single prompt that it's running. And in this case, it's just saying below is a list of conversation summaries, generate a parent-child taxonomy, right? And here, this is actually where we're using the output from the previous flow, which is those single line summaries, to get a better taxonomy than what we had before. And we're asking for two different classes, and that's essentially what this flow does. So it's just going to improve our taxonomy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back into our Streamlit application here, and any file that has a true next to it essentially means it was processed. And if you actually take a look at any of these files, you can see that these all have the single line summaries. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to select two of these files, in this case ABCD1 and ABCD2, and we're going to send all of these single line summaries in both of these. You can see that we have 20 in this case to that one flow, and we're going to ask it to generate a better taxonomy than what we have here. So let's go down here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have those two files selected, and I'm going to press this button called generate taxonomy from selected files. And as soon as I do that, you can see this is running. And this is pretty much making that call. So you can see that it's aggregated 20 lines into that prompt. So those are 20 single line summaries. It's invoked the flow. It's gotten a completion, reason, success, and then it's successfully updated the taxonomy. And all that's doing is it's updating this .txt file. And you can see we have a much better taxonomy. So if you actually take a look at that on Streamlit, this is what it looks like. So you can see it's actually updated here. So now we've gotten a much better parent-child class, so customer inquiries, order status. We have technical issues about website performance, and you can see this taxonomy was actually generated from what's in our data. So we had that original simple one, and now we've actually generated a sort of set of labels that are outside of what we had before. And yeah, that's essentially the second flow. It's a very simple flow, but it just aggregates those single line summaries and then gets you a taxonomy out. And what we can now do is actually we can label our old conversations with this new taxonomy. So if we go ahead and let's just do one, so I'm not just burning tokens, we'll just do one file that isn't labeled, so ABCD 5. And if we go ahead and then hit the run auto label flow, this will then start triggering that flow. And you can see it's going conversation by conversation. It's invoking that flow one by one. And it's basically going through all the 10 conversations in that file. And it's also now passing in this newly updated taxonomy. So we can see the file was updated, and then the database was also updated as well. So if I jump in here, and let's go ahead and view this selected files, what we should see is that new set of labels on this conversation. So if you take a look at our labels, you can see now we have customer inquiries, promo codes, customer service, order inquiries. It's a lot more granular than what we had before. And we still have our single line and our reasoning. And yeah, that's basically a very simple app that I worked on this weekend. And if we go ahead and select a bunch, let me just deselect this. If we select a bunch of these process files, actually these two aren't going to have our new labels. So let's just select the one file that has our labels. And if you click generate visualizations, it's just going to give you a simple pie graph of basically the different labels that are in there. And if you actually select two files, it'll aggregate those data frames. But what you'll see is we have the old labels from our old taxonomy and we have our new taxonomy. So we would want to rerun the prompt. But yeah, that's essentially the last section there. Cool. So that's a high level overview of what's actually going on. I'm just going to step through a little bit of the code. since I know quite a few people are interested in that. So very simple. The Streamlit application has a few functions that it's using. And so we're loading in a Bedrock helper class that I've defined right here. And we're essentially just using the Bedrock Amazon package to basically set up some different functions. And here in this case, I'll walk through the auto label flow. So we are essentially creating an invoke flow call, which is essentially the API call that you make. We're giving it our flow alias identifiers, and we're loading in our conversation and our taxonomy in an array. And that's how it actually goes into that auto label data frame or data input on the GUI. And then in this case, we just have some logic to parse the metadata keys and then return the convo. And that's essentially what this class does. It just has a few functions to help around that. So we define that. And then we have a few more helper functions like loading the different taxonomies from files. We have the generate visualizations, which is just also concatenating the different files in a format for Plotly, and so on and so forth. And yeah, we just have a very simple Streamlit application that runs through that. So that's a bit of the code. If there's any further questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comment section. But essentially, it's just doing the same thing. It's just invoking those flows and just manipulating the data in different ways to send it to AWS. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. It was a very quick project, but I wanted to learn sort of the features of AWS Bedrock, and I thought this would be a great use case to do that. I'll leave some links below for any of the resources that I use that sort of helped me figure this out. There was some very great tutorials that I found on YouTube. And yeah, I'll also leave a link to the dataset if you want to try this yourself. And if you have any further questions, please let me know.